to be talking to you guys today about Jesus as a teacher from a teacher perspective. So, a lot of times we think about Jesus and what he taught, but we don't always look at how he taught. So, that's kind of where I wanted to take us today and from a teaching perspective. And I actually learned a lot of interesting things going through it. And so I just wanted to share you guys my thoughts on it and look at how Jesus reached different people. So, first off, Jesus came with a purpose, which was the cross. That was his main purpose here, was to come and die on the cross for our sins. But until that time, he had another purpose while he was here, and it was to teach others and to prepare them. He also used his teaching to prepare not only just the disciples, but others as well. Anyone that listened to him, I think, was affected by what he said, and um, he taught them important lessons for generations to come, lessons we still use today, which goes into more of like what he taught. We're going to be looking more at how he taught because we also use that today, which is one thing I actually discovered going through this idea that I had. Was just looking at, what I've learned about teaching and working in education for 14 years now, 15 maybe. I lost count, but um, anyway, it just teaches us that it was just interesting, I guess, from thinking of it from a teacher's perspective, that Jesus used some of the same strategies that they teach educators today to use. The first thing I want to talk about is that Jesus taught with authority. And he had credibility because he lived out what he taught. So things that he said, the way he acted, really spoke a lot to his character. And it gave him this authority, not only because he had authority from God in heaven, but just the way he acted, I think, also gave people this feeling of like, oh, like he's smart. He knows what he is doing. And we actually see that in Matthew 7 verse 29. Um Quote here from the verse, because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. So there's something about just the way that he taught and spoke, I think, that people were just instantly like, oh man, this guy, he knows his stuff. Like, just, it's hard to explain, but they had that sense of like he had authority from God because he was God. And I think people just kind of sensed that about him, that like there was something special about this man and what he had to say. Even if they didn't agree with him all the time, I feel like he still made an impact because of that authority that he had. And this is just a note on this verse here, that this is the conclusion of his Sermon on the Mount, and that the crowd was amazed and recognized his authority. So just kind of context there about that verse in Matthew that I grabbed. So Jesus used different street teaching strategies to reach different people. And this is where I kind of got into my like teacher education that I've learned about and thought about, like, okay, what techniques did Jesus use? And as I thought about it more, and as we'll go through a few here in a minute, I realized like people are still doing these techniques today. Like Jesus may not have called them that, but that some of the terms that I'm going to teach you guys, but people still are using these ideas and concepts both within the church, teaching one another, and within just general education. These strategies that Jesus used are being used today. So the first one I wanted to look at was, I thought of direct instruction, which is a teacher term, and it just means a teacher-led whole grouped approach. And Jesus did this. He had large groups of people that he basically, the Sermon on the Mount, he gave sermons to crowds of people. I have the example there in Matthew 5 through 7. It's a lot to cover there, but I just kind of wanted to note that that is one example of him using this whole group approach and being able to um, speak to a large group of people that were willing to listen to him. And that in itself was pretty powerful. And we use this today. Like, think of church service this morning, like talking to a large group of people. He also did a lot of relatable storytelling through his parables, and he used examples that the crowds could understand. So this was very impactful. And we've talked about this when we've gone through other stories, like thinking about the context of everything and understanding that he related it to the people that he was talking to. That also had a great impact on everything because they could understand these examples and these connections he was making to try and teach them. So some examples of that from the Sermon on the Mount and other further in Matthew, I guess, the lost sheep. So talking about a shepherd, he used a story there in Matthew 18 where we had a shepherd go after the lost sheep, and people could relate to that because they understood what it meant to be a shepherd and to look after your sheep. Like even if they didn't do that job, I think they probably thought, they understood that, that's what a shepherd's job is to do, is to take care of the sheep and to make sure all are accounted for. They understood that. The next one is Matthew 13, the parable of the sower. The sower. That's a hard word to say. Matthew 13, 1 through 9. And actually, I think this is right after that as well. The disciples came to him and asked, "Why do you speak to the people in parables?" He replied, "Because the knowledge of the secrets of kingdom has been given to you, but not to them." So he's kind of telling them that, like, they wouldn't understand everything I'm teaching you, and you my disciples, but so I'm telling them something important information in a way that they can understand. That's kind of what I think he's saying to the disciples here. There's a lot more we can go into it with like the theology behind that, but for what I'm talking about, I think that's kind of his point, was that like they don't have the knowledge that I'm giving to you, so I'm giving it to them in a way they can relate to. I think that's a powerful thing as well. So those are just two examples of how he's using his relatable storytelling. And up next, we've got some questions for you guys. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on some of what I've talked about. And first one, what made Jesus' teaching style authoritative compared to scribes and Pharisees of his time? So I touched on this a little bit, but I want to hear from you guys. You can talk at your table. Think about, what does it mean to you? Do you have a different idea of it? And like maybe someone can explain it better than I can, but just something to think about, like why his teaching style was authoritative compared to the scribes and the Pharisees of his time. Like what made him stand out? And then how did he use everyday mundane objects like seeds, salt, and coins to illustrate profound spiritual truths? We could spend a whole lot of time on that question, so um we can, you know, it's definitely more detailed than we have time to go into today, but just thinking about that as well also goes back to that relatability. So take a minute, discuss at your table. All right, moving on. We are going to talk about how Jesus modeled. So he also did a lot of modeling, and just to kind of give you a definition of it from an educator perspective, modeling is basically a learner-centered approach. So before, we looked at his direct instruction, which was like when he would talk and speak to big, large groups. So now we have this more of what like the disciples probably experienced, this modeling. And like I wrote here experiential learning by observations. So basically just learning through experience and observing other people. So people observing Jesus's action. And I think everyone got to really do that. Anyone he interacted with definitely got to see and observe his actions, his attitudes, how he handled things. Um, and then the disciples, of course, probably got the most up close observation of his life and of this modeling concept. And the one what stood out to me when I thought about this, I guess, is that he taught by example. And so we see that in John 13, verses 1 through 17, where we have the story of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. So I just have a little snip from there. Um, Somebody wants to read. I'll go ahead and read this one since I'm recording this. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I have done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. So right there, that was like the main thing when I thought about like Jesus modeled things. This was the story I immediately thought of was washing the disciples' feet. Like he got down on his hands and knees, washed their dirty feet, and basically told them like, "I washed your feet. You go wash each other's and go out and do this for others. Like the kindness and respect that I've showed you, I want you to do the same for others." So he modeled that to them by doing it for them and washing their feet. And then I think about the widow's offering was another example I thought of in Mark 12. And Jesus used those around him to teach important lessons. She gave all she had. So that's the story of the widow that comes to the church and she puts all, like, I think, was it like 2 coins? Just a few coins into the, like, offering plate. And kind of the Pharisees and some other people that are kind of standing around kind of like act like she didn't really do everything that she should have. And he kind of points out to them the fact like she's giving everything that she has. Like he knows her heart, he knows what's going on with her, and he uses that opportunity to even teach those like hey, don't make fun of her. She's doing the best she can, and I'll accept that because I know her heart is true and I know she's giving everything she's got. I also wrote a note here. He focused on practice, and he calls us to learn from his teaching and apply it. So, again, that's kind of going back to that story of him washing the disciples' feet. He's in verse 15. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. So he's calling us into practice, and he even when the disciples were walking through him, there's tons of examples I could have pulled out of just times where he encourages them to go out and, you know, do the things that he's been doing. Um, so we really made that a priority as well. Was just to he modeled what he wanted us to do and what he wanted the disciples to do, and he sent us, the Great Commission: go out and tell. Jesus also encouraged thinking. And we're gonna have some questions for our table in a minute after this slide here. But he used interactive discussions with people. He allowed people to ask questions. And he would often answer with a question. And I actually did some research on this, and I found out he asks around 300 insightful and thought-provoking questions. So within the Bible, if you were to go, and I didn't try to count, I had a couple different sources that said like 305, 307. So I just kind of said like, okay, it's around 300. People are, not agreeing on the exact amount, but it's around 300 questions that he asked to different people. So not only did he allow them to ask questions, but he also asked a lot of questions. And sometimes he often answered with a question. And then when we have one of the questions I thought of was Mark 8:29. But what about you? He asked. Who do you say I am? Peter answered, you are the Messiah. Pretty powerful question. Like, it seems like such a simple question, but there's a lot behind it. And then I just had this, I wanted y'all to think about this before we go into our next question for your table is imagine Jesus personally asking you some of these questions. What are you looking for? Who are you looking for? Why are you so afraid? Do you understand what I have done for you? Have I not chosen you? Do you still not understand? Do you love me? And here's a favorite. Who can add an hour to their life by worrying? So just thinking about those, like some of them seem like pretty simple questions on the surface, but if you really think about it, coming from Jesus, these are powerful questions. Like, he's trying to get it to the root of your heart on some of these. Like, what are you looking for? Who are you looking for? Why are you afraid? Do you love me? Like, it's really thought provoking and really makes you like do a lot of self reflection. So with that, I'm going to let you guys discuss it a little and think about, in what ways did Jesus use questions to prompt deeper thinking rather than just giving a direct answer. So talk a minute at your table and think about, this question about Jesus's questions. And I have a little thought on it before we move on from this topic, but I'll let y'all discuss. All right, so here's some things I found about Jesus's questions that I wanted to add. Um, just I did some research on this to see if kind of people had studied this topic. When I started thinking about Jesus's questions, I was like, okay, let's look at that a little bit more. Because this is a powerful teaching technique too, is just asking questions and getting someone to think and reflect. And we do that a lot in education. We're taught to kind of get people thinking and to explain their thinking. So these questions really kind of did that in Jesus's time. And the first one is in Genesis when God asked the first recorded question, "Where are you?" to Adam and Eve. And I like this note that I found. It says, God didn't need the information. He knew exactly where Adam was and why he was hiding. Instead, God asked a question with which Adam would have to wrestle, a question with which humanity still has to wrestle. So, even just that first question, because of the context of the story, like on the surface, if you just read the question, "Where are you?" it doesn't sound that, you know, big of a deal. But within the context of what has happened at this point, Adam and Eve have both eaten the fruit. They've realized they messed up. And God comes by and he's like, "Okay, where are you? I came to hang out. Where are you?" He knows where they are. He knows what happened. He knows what's going on, but he still asks. And so that was powerful in of itself. Like he was already, even back in the Old Testament, before Jesus came, before God sent Jesus to the earth, came here as himself. He was even asking questions back then to the first two humans, you know. So powerful questions. And his questions are still relevant today. And here's a little uh in my research, I found this cool graphic here. I don't know who this guy is, Zach somebody, but I liked what it said. It says Jesus asked curiosity questions. So he got you thinking. That's what curiosity questions think you make you do, or make you want to go seek more answers, like seeking more. That's kind of what I thought of it when I read it. He wanted people to be curious, so he asked questions that made them really think and want to go know more. And then he asked open-ended questions, so it wasn't usually a yes or no question. It was a lot more deeper than that and required to people to like really reflect and think about things. He asked challenging questions. Some of the questions he asked some people kind of challenged their beliefs. I think of like maybe the rich young ruler. I think he's like asking Jesus how he can change, and he's like, "Sell all your stuff," and that was difficult. That was a difficult answer for him, and he didn't ask when questions. So I thought that was a interesting thing. He changed it up here and like didn't really ask questions about when something would happen. He kept things just like open-ended and all of that. So I thought that was really interesting. So next I wanted to look at, I was thinking about Jesus's teaching environment, because that's another thing that educators are taught about. It's like our type of environment, and it's not necessarily like the location that you're at, because he for Jesus at least, he moved around all the place, so he was all kind of places, but it's more of like the atmosphere. So I feel like he created a safe space for mistakes. Like anyone who made a mistake, whether it was his disciples or people he came into contact with, he never made anybody feel like they were just so evil for doing it. I guess that's the best way to explain that. He made him feel like, yes, I know you've messed up, but there's still hope. Like I think of we when we talked about last week or last week we talked about the woman at the well. Like he knew who she was, but he didn't make her feel like their mistakes were like the end of it. There was hope. He said it doesn't matter what you what you've done. There's still hope for you to change. So I think that was an important thing that I noticed and thought about. Like he never made anybody feel like the mistakes were too much, I guess. And he used mistakes to continue teaching, which we saw that um I think again in the woman who gives her coins and the people are not kind to her. Jesus also provides. So here's an example of that. I found Matthew 11. He says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened. I will give you rest." So he can provide things. "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So again, there's a lot more we could go into with that verse, but I think what I was kind of thinking of when I found this verse was his providing and like giving a safe space where you can have rest. You can learn from him. He's gentle and humble. Like that all goes back to those points of his environment that he created around him when he was the way he interacted with people. And then I thought about Jesus corrects. You know, part of his teaching environment was offering correction. And I thought of Nicodemus for that. Um, we have it here, John 3. Nicodemus says, "You are Israel's teacher," said Jesus, "and you do not understand these things. Very truly, I tell you, we speak what we know, and we testify to what we have seen. But still, you people do not accept our testimony. I have spoken to you of earthly things, and you do not believe. How then will you believe if I speak of heavenly things?" So again, he hits him there with a powerful question, but he's basically telling Nicodemus here, like correcting him, like, you do not understand these things. We need to speak about what we know. I'm trying to remember like the context here. So he's given um some correction to Nicodemus here. And then he also allows for questions and doubts. So, like, to give some context on Nicodemus, he was kind of not understanding everything Jesus was saying to him. So, he's gonna just kind of correcting him and trying to tell him exactly what it means. Because he'd been basically sharing the gospel with him, and Nicodemus still didn't quite get it. So, here he's kind of telling him, like, I've told you of these things and you do not believe. How will you believe if I speak of heavenly things? So he's kind of giving some correction there and making Nicodemus stop and think about what's happening. And then we have, and we see in Thomas that Jesus allows for questions and doubting. We see an example here. So in John 20, verse 25, so the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hand and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." So Thomas, we know this story. Thomas was having doubts and he's like, "I want to see it. I want to see for myself. I want to feel it. I want to understand, you know." And a week later, the disciples were in the house again and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out. Put reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." So it almost feels like Jesus just shows up right at that moment because he knows Thomas has had these doubts and he wants to show him that, like, you know what, I shouldn't have to come to you. It feels like too, because it's a week later, maybe he tried to give him some time to, like, believe it without seeing, but Thomas was still in his little doubt. He was still doubting. So Jesus was like, "You know what? Let's go tell this guy what's going on." And he says, "Stop doubting and believe." And Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." Now, that's not a question, but that's some powerful stuff. So, even within his atmosphere of teaching, Jesus did all those kind of different things. Um, and creating this environment and this atmosphere with the way he interacted with people, the way he taught them, and, you know, being a provider, providing correction, allowing for questions, and doubting when Thomas doubted him. So, just all of that created a good teaching environment, I think, that also helped him make a powerful impact in what he taught to everyone. Some questions for your table. How can we apply Jesus' methods of discipleship in our modern, fast paced world? And then, how can we balance seeing Jesus as both a teacher or instructor and a savior or sacrifice? I think maybe a better way to say that second question might be like, why is it important to see him in both of these ways? So I would add that on to um, this question, like, to talk about at your table. All right, and then I just have some final thoughts for you guys, kind of to wrap up what we talked about today. It says, Jesus used every moment that he could for teaching and preparing his followers for his purpose, to die on the cross for our sins, because he knew that was his main purpose. So he wanted, while he was waiting for that appointed time, he had another great purpose to teach and prepare those that would be left behind after him. Mainly the disciples. He prepared them to begin the church after he left, because that's basically what happened. The disciples, after they had their morning time and Thomas got over his doubting and all of that, and Jesus came back and prepared them even a little bit more, and then he sent them out and they began the church and began their ministry. He taught with a whole group approach to large crowds when he gave sermon, and like I said, we see this today, um, within church and education. I teach a class of 23. That's a big group when they're little. So, and then, we see every church has pastors that preach to big crowds of people on Sunday mornings. So, this idea of this large large group teaching is still used today. He also taught a small group, which is another teacher term. Uh, he used a small group approach with his 12 disciples. He modeled to them, he let them do life alongside with him to learn through experience, which is kind of what a small group does. Like for um, educators, we have small group to kind of help boost our students with their skills and work in a smaller group that we can really work with a smaller amount of children, basically. And Jesus kind of did this with his disciples. Like, he had uh, his close friends. I guess I'd call them friends, but they were basically his disciples that he chose because he had a purpose for them, and he let them walk alongside him and learn. And they probably were taught things that he didn't always share with the larger group because he wanted them to go out and share it as well. And they got to see him up close all the time. Um, Another thought here is that his questions, we talked about his questions, he encouraged thinking and reflection. And then I have this here that I found in my research. It was from a children's Sunday school lesson. But I thought it was cool. I just wanted to end with this. It says Jesus was a teacher. Jesus didn't come just to be our savior. He came to be a teacher too. Jesus would sit on a hillside and talk for hours. He would teach them everything they needed to know. But Jesus didn't teach out of a book like they do at school. He didn't teach people reading, writing, and arithmetic. Jesus taught the people about who God is. So that right there, I think, was his biggest purpose of being a teacher, was to teach about who God is and to prepare the people for all generations that would come behind to read the Bible, and any future generations that read all the lessons that he taught. But um, I just think it's good to look at how he taught it too. Like, why were some of the lessons and things so impactful? I think because of all of these different ways and the way he reached different people and asked questions to challenge and encourage thinking. So, and if you guys have any final thoughts you'd like to share, I'd like to hear from you. And that's the end and everything I have for you guys today.